The Institute of Internal Auditors presents All Things Internal Audit. In this episode, Deborah Poulalion and Andy Cook break down key findings from the 2026 North American Pulse of Internal Audit report. They discuss tightening budgets, staffing pressures, the growing importance of strategic alignment, and how audit teams are balancing assurance work with increasing technology and compliance demands. The conversation also highlights industry trends and what audit leaders should prioritize moving forward.
Andy, hello. It is wonderful to see you today. And I am excited to talk about what we learned in the 2026 North American Pulse of Internal Audit report, especially after such an interesting year.
Absolutely. It's great to be back. It's great to talk to you again, Deborah. I really enjoy the Pulse report. Each year it comes out. We've been doing this since 2008. Part of the beauty of this is that you ask the same questions year after year after year, and you really get a good sense of kind of the trends that are developing and that sort of thing. It's great for audit leaders, and I'm thrilled to be back with you and talking to you again about Pulse.
So just as a reminder, the survey was conducted at the end of 2025, mainly in November, and it's answered by CAEs and heads of internal audit throughout the United States, Canada, and our friends in the Caribbean. And I also want to point out this year, we asked people what would make Pulse better, and they said they would like to see more industry views. So we've added some industry views to the report for public sector, financial services, manufacturing, education, and healthcare.
Yeah, so the podcast will take a look at some of the more interesting and relevant findings this year and figure out directionally where we think we might be going from an internal audit perspective. So looking forward to that discussion. Please download your free copy of the Pulse report at theiaa.org/Pulse. You'll be able to get a hold of that and follow along with our discussion as well. So thanks for joining.
So to get started, we're going to talk about what's on every audit leader's mind, which is their budget. So if you have the report and can turn to page 8, you're going to see a beautiful line graph that I made because I do the analysis on the data. So we ask the same question about budget every year. We've been doing it for nearly 20 years. And the question is, looking back over the past 12 months, did your internal audit budget increase, decrease, or stay the same? And so what we're seeing is a significant drop in the percentage of respondents who said they had budget growth last year. So it went from 34%, so nearly a third having budget growth, down to 23%. At the same time, we're also seeing higher percentage of functions saying they've had budget cuts. So that went from 11% with budget cuts up to 19%. And what you can see in the graph is that both these measures are now similar to what we were seeing after the first year of COVID in 2021.
Yeah, so not great news here. I think the initial take on this is that organizations are showing a conservative approach to budgeting as they work through market uncertainty and cuts to expenses overall. As a cost center that sometimes we are viewed as an internal audit, rather than a revenue generator or a revenue enhancer, we tend to be affected by these cuts. So inflation, increases in variable costs on products and services, all these things can create some concern around everybody's budget and kind of give us a squeeze. The critical thing that we could kind of take away from this is that we should be making sure that we are having open and regular communications with the board and with senior management to continue to sell the value of internal audit to organizations to counteract some of this. Because I really feel like if people understand kind of what we're able to contribute to our organizations, I think that these cuts hopefully will be limited as we start thinking about the path forward.
That's a good perspective. And also talking about the industry differences, if you turn over to page 9, you'll start seeing the industry breakouts. And the most important thing we discovered from looking at industry is that financial services was an exception. So that was the only sector where the budget growth stayed relatively strong from 2024 to 2025.
Yeah, so this is kind of my wheelhouse. This is where I do a lot of my work in the financial services space. Budgets in this space, I feel like, are a little more less inclined to have a lot of fluctuations because of regulatory expectations and expectations of audit committees in these organizations. Coverage is more set, more defined, potentially more inflexible, allowing audit strategies to cause financial services audit shops to limit these big budget swings. You're not going to see that as much in the financial services space just because of these key requirements, I guess, in these organizations. So I would anticipate less of these types of swings in this space.
So when you think about budgets, you also think about your staffing. We have that data too in Pulse. So it's a little bit different than the budget trend. Again, we ask a very similar question. Did your staff increase, decrease, or stay the same? What we're seeing is, however, that we have more functions who said they had staff cuts last year than the prior year. So it went from 11% to 18%, which is the same metric that we had in 2020 during COVID for that point. However, more people are experiencing staff cuts. Staff growth is staying about the same. This potentially could be we have a net loss.
Yeah, my interpretation of this is that when we start thinking about headcount, there may be a hesitation out there to backfill within the organization. Turnover will occur in internal audit. That's a prolific thing. I think, a 10% turnover rate is not unheard of on a regular basis. The way we address some of these budget constraints is not to backfill those positions a lot of times. So I think organizations may say, we got to freeze on hiring going forward. Auditors are leaving and we're just not backfilling those positions. There's also a lot of sensitivity around external pressures that are happening. As I mentioned, inflation, tariffs, geopolitical concerns, market uncertainty. Everybody's a little gun shy when it comes to a lot of these things. And I think there's a tendency to kind of scale back and bury our heads and try to survive all this upheaval that's happening within the industries or within our organizations overall. So I think there's some concern along those lines, and I think people are kind of locking in at this point in this space. So that's going to be the effect of the staff piece as well as the overall budget piece that we were just talking about. So,
Thank you. That makes sense. And also looking at the industry differences, we again see financial services with less impact. It was the only industry where they did not have an increase in staff cuts.
Yeah, same explanation there as well. I think there is some level of expectation when it comes to internal audit deliverables and from a regulatory standpoint, as well as an audit committee or senior management standpoint. So there's a little less flexibility when it comes to that.
So we learned some very interesting things about what can impact or actually has a relationship to your budget and staffing trends. And that is how well internal audit is aligned with organizational strategy. So first of all, let's talk about what question we asked in the survey and also what page you can see this on. So that's page 30. And we asked, to what extent do you believe your internal audit function is aligned with the strategic plan of your organization? So we have about 60% saying they are fully or almost fully aligned. About 37% said moderately aligned, and very few said that they were not aligned with strategy. That's good. We want alignment with strategy. But what was really interesting is that there is a difference between being moderately aligned and being more fully aligned, especially when it comes to budget. So if you turn to page 7, what you're going to see is those that were aligned with strategy, were more well aligned with strategy, were more likely to have sufficient funding compared to those who were only moderately aligned. So if you were well aligned, 59% said they also had strong funding. If you were only moderately aligned, only 29% said they had strong funding. That is a 30 percentage point gap. This makes the data analyst just nearly faint with excitement because it's really a big difference. And it's just something to explore. Now, we don't know, we cannot say for sure what causes the difference, but we can say the difference is there.
Yeah. And, the idea, we came out with this finding last year, and I'm glad to see it's a consistent trend. The idea of aligning your audit work with the organizational objectives is a critical point. And I think the other thing that we were just talking about was kind of the value add that internal audit can offer to an organization. And this is a good way of doing it. So if we say the organization is focused on X, Y, and Z, showing that internal audit is focused on X, Y, and Z as well provides that value to the organization and allows for an independent and objective view of those key initiatives and key things that are going on in the organization. Therefore, management, the board, all the committees, they will see a lot of value in that, and they will make sure that alignment is maintained. And we need to make sure that we're constantly communicating our alignment with the strategy of the organization.
That's a very good observation. And so looking at industry differences, the big news is there were none. So regardless of your sector, your industry, how big or small your function is, whether or not you have SOX implemented, those who were more aligned with organizational strategy had stronger funding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was glad to see that there was not an industry specific shifts or anything like that. It just shows the value, regardless of your industry, the value that alignment can provide to the internal audit shop as well as the organizations that we're working for.
Exactly. So the last and final section that we're looking at in the Pulse report this year is about the audit plan. And so this flows right into adding value. And so the question we ask in the survey is, looking ahead over the next 12 months, please indicate what percentage of your audit plan you anticipate will be allocated to each of the audit areas listed. We have a nice long list. What we're going to talk about today are the three areas that are always on the top. So the first is operational auditing. This is essential for internal auditors. Auditors say that about 17% of their audit plan is allocated to this area.
This is bread and butter for the organization. This is operational audits is where we spend a lot of our time. It's been that way for years. It continues to be that way. It makes perfect sense.
Exactly. And the next area is compliance. And we're going to talk about two different ways we look at compliance in this survey. One is compliance in general. And on average, 15% of the audit plan is allocated to compliance. And then if you want to look more specifically at organizations where SOX has been implemented, in those, about 30% of the audit plan goes toward the areas related to SOX. So it's a large chunk of the audit plan to compliance in those areas.
Yeah, and our exposure to this, generally speaking, when it comes to compliance is there's really, speaking of inflexible, there's very little flexibility that you can do with compliance work. You need to make sure that you're auditing that space for sure. So spending time in that space, making sure that we're adhering to critical regulations and everything that we need to be doing for our organization, that is locked in, and we need to make sure that we're addressing those points for sure.
Exactly. And then the last area, it really highlights how important technology is, technology skills and ability for the internal audit function. Because when you look at the audit plan allocation for cybersecurity and IT combined, it's 17%. So it's just as high as compliance and operational auditing, and it's all about technology.
Yeah, there's very little that we can do here to avoid the technology audit and the work that we need to do in this space because it does cross all lines. Everything that we're doing as an organization has an IT component to it. So you do have to make sure that you're addressing those key controls. They can also be some of the higher risk controls that you want to make sure that you're addressing in your audits. So cybersecurity for sure. We've seen all the articles, we've seen all the write-ups on issues with cybersecurity and things that can happen to organizations across the board. So you do want to make sure that you are addressing these, and it is crossing all lines. So you do want to make sure that you're addressing these critical risks in each of your audits based on your risk assessment.
And so tying this all together, we've looked at budget, we've looked at staff, how there's pressures, and we've looked at what we need to do with the audit plan. So just kind of tell us, how these things are working together and some best practices and ideas for that.
Yeah, when you start looking at the overall mix, when we start talking about assurance versus advisory, looking at this, how you're budgeting your time and where you're spending your time as an audit group, we're looking at the consistency from year to year. So this 75-25 split we've seen in the past, we're seeing it now, limited movement. When we did Vision 2035, and you can go out and reference that report as well, you'll see that there was a thought that we would be moving to more of a 60-40 split when it comes to assurance versus advisory work. And we are not seeing that happen yet. So when we start thinking about budgets and the information that we're getting on staffing and that sort of thing, assurance continues to be our bread and butter. It continues to be what we're here to do. So you want to make sure that you're addressing your assurance work first, and make sure that you're getting all that attention to your assurance side of it. And if there is more flexibility, it allows us to do more advisory type work. So the idea that this percentage has not necessarily moved year over year makes sense to me, particularly with a lot of the budget concerns that we were talking about earlier. I can't speak enough about the report. I love it. I think there's a lot of great information in it. We've hit the high points, a lot of the high points that we've identified in our review, but make sure you go out there and download your free copy of the Pulse report at the IAA.org/Pulse. You can get this information, spend some time on this report. There's some great information in there if you're interested.
It's been a pleasure, Andy. Thank you.
Same here, Deborah. Looking forward to next year.
If you like this podcast, please subscribe and rate us. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also catch other episodes on YouTube or at the IAA.org. That's THEIIA.org.